week, Michael Whitaker sailed through his confirmation hearing in front of the Senate Commerce Committee. Did a fantastic job. But that got me thinking. Let's talk about it. So last week, Michael Whitaker sailed through his confirmation hearing. That'll go fine, and I expect that he'll soon be confirmed to be the FAA's administrator. That'll be great news, and that got me to thinking how darn important that position really is. He made a lot of commitments about, following through on safety, things that have already been put on the table, and he's going to stay focused on that, and I believe he absolutely will. But he also, committed to a bunch of visits to members' states and locations and things like that. And it just seemed to detract from how important that position was. So I thought I'd look through some history and kind of walk through why I think that position is just unbelievably important. So on June 30th, 1956, a horrific sequence occurred above the skies in Arizona that changed, in some people's mind, changed aviation forever. Changed air traffic control forever. But I think it just changed the way that we do business until we need to change again. And at that time, we really needed a change. And you can see some of the same challenges that occurred in the 1950s that are happening to us today. So I thought it was a good history part. So two airliners from two major U.S. carriers came together at 21,000 feet over the Grand Canyon, with no flight recorders, no witnesses, no radar records, and unfortunately no survivors, and one of the most hospitable crash sites in the history of commercial aviation. Investigators faced it's just an impossible task of reconstructing what happened and why. Investigators did indeed, at that time, reconstruct the accident and came to a startling conclusion that the accident was not the fault of either the crew but the air traffic control system itself and the lack thereof. It was a time at which that air traffic control was unable to provide the safety to the flying public with a growing number of aircraft in the skies. Kind of sounds familiar from the news we're hearing lately. So the fallout of this disaster shaped to what we know the FAA is today. It's how the FAA became, because it wasn't the FAA prior to that, and pretty much the way that we fly today. The 1950s was an incredible era. Economic growth, revolutionary new products, grand infrastructure projects across the United States, and a massive increase in air travel. Sound familiar? Planes were larger and could carry more people. Those people could afford the tickets, and safety innovations of the airplanes themselves changed the public view so that flying wasn't all that dangerous. As commercial aviation prospered, the supporting infrastructure just wasn't keeping pace. Now remember, this system was just out of the bonfires and flags stage. It was medieval in comparison to what was occurring in all walks of life in the 1950s. So until about 1950, the skies over the United States were mostly uncontrolled. The number of planes were low in comparison to the great expanse of the U.S. The possibility of a collision away from more congested airports was just unthinkable. Civilian radar was brand new and had been installed in large cities to assist air traffic controllers there, but it was only in 1950 that authorities even instituted a system of designated airways based on navigational aids with standard rules for traffic and rights of way. The new system was a reaction to a rapid increase in the number of airplanes in the United States, but it only covered the east of the Mississippi, so just the East Coast. Beyond the 100th meridian, where the western United States is considered to begin, and where cities were limited due to more arid conditions and a reliance on irrigation which barely existed for agriculture, air traffic retained the right to fly anywhere at any altitude, mainly due to the lower density of airplanes and airports. Large sections of the West were covered with uncontrolled airspace. Controllers did not actively monitor or control the positions or altitudes of aircraft. They simply prepared for an aircraft's eventual entry back into controlled sectors and prepare for their arrival into controlled airports. One of the largest of these controlled areas stretches across Arizona, Nevada, and Utah. Now, this was the 1950s, and Phoenix and Vegas had less than 1/15 of their present population, just to give a sense of just how desolate the area was. There just wasn't anybody there at the time. Any flight traveling between Southern California and places east had to pass through this uncontrolled zone. TWA Flight 2, a regularly scheduled flight from Los Angeles to New York with a stop in Kansas City, was to be no exception. The other aircraft in this tragedy was United Flight 718, another regularly scheduled flight from Los Angeles to Newark with stops at Chicago and Philadelphia. They also had to fly through this uncontrolled airspace. TWA-2 departed Los Angeles first, with 70 people on board, and United 718 departed just 3 minutes later with 58 people on board, and it was that day, June 30th, 1956. Both aircraft took two different routes to make their eastbound journeys. So TWA-2 started off northeastbound and then turned towards Kansas City, and United 718 flew due east before turning northeast towards Chicago. So their routes would eventually cross over the airspace in the desert over Arizona. At that time, the aircraft did not speak directly to air traffic controllers while en route. Instead, the airplanes communicate with company radio, and then they relayed messages to regional control centers to get a sense of the progress of the airplanes in preparation for arrival into those more busy places. So through radio relay, air traffic monitors the coordination with Salt Lake Air Traffic Control, which was not in controlled airspace. They knew that the aircraft would cross at nearly the same point, but TWA-2 did something that we don't allow today. They asked for 1,000 on top, a procedure where the aircraft would fly under visual flight rules in which the pilot is responsible for their own navigation and separation from other aircraft and must stay at least 1,000 feet away from any clouds. Now, you can do this at low levels today, but not in what we call positive control airspace above 18,000 feet today. So it's just that they were really high, and this is a procedure that we just don't let happen now. So in 1956, airliners regularly requested and received these kinds of clearance, even at altitudes super high, which is no longer allowed. It just so happened that 1,000 feet on top was the equivalent of 21,000 feet, the same altitude as United 718. Traffic information was even relayed to the aircraft. So it was all legal and routine for 1956. The separation between the aircraft rested with the pilots, and it was discovered later that neither aircraft was on a direct route to their destinations anyway. Radar couldn't see them, radar couldn't monitor them, but both aircraft had deviated to the north. So they were both in the same spot, unfortunately, at the same time. Rumors abound that both aircraft independently decided to give their passengers a little tour of the Grand Canyon. Pilots had become used to the flying freedom of being able to do those kinds of things and show off the Grand Canyon to their passengers. In the 1950s, attracting passengers was not a race to the bottom like it is today, but a race to the top in terms of what the airlines could offer. Sightseeing detours, especially the Grand Canyon, were an easy method to convince the public, the majority of who had never been on an airplane, to go fly instead of driving or taking the train. So, weather in this fateful day over the Grand Canyon was not very good. It was overcast, with thunderstorms reaching over 30,000 feet. Investigators would later consider that both airplanes may have been deviating around those thunderstorms, and that may have led to the accident. Both planes would have been maneuvering just to catch a glimpse of the Grand Canyon or to stay away from the thunderstorms in any way. It may have been impossible for either aircraft to be able to see each other. So on June 30th, between 10:30 and 10:31 in the morning, United Airlines 718 collided with TWA-2, instantly crippling both aircraft beyond any hope of recovery, and all 128 persons on board perished. The disaster by far was the deadliest commercial air disaster at that time, and the first in which over 100 people perished. It's a grim milestone that underscored the increased stakes of aviation safety in a time when people were flying bigger airplanes more often. Everyone was following the rules, but that didn't work. So the rules needed to be changed. Our safer than crossing the street air traffic control system owes a great deal to this area in aviation. And if you are ever at the Grand Canyon, there is a National History Landmark sign commemorating the tragedy. Just try to remember what good came from that time. Now let me leave you with this. We have a vibrant ATC system which is showing similar signs of the 1950s. Tremendous growth, new aircraft, aging infrastructure, policies and procedures that date back into the 50s and 60s. And we have more near collisions, at least publicly stated, than we've ever had before, and available technologies and solutions to fix them. We will need leadership similar to the 1950s, along with money. Everything takes more money. Hit like and subscribe. I hope you let me know what you thought of this and this format. We'll talk to you next time.